Today we're looking at why modern cars are cookie-cutter cars that are homogeneous and hard to differentiate. We'll also see what's ruining the American car and what limits car stylists from dreaming big. We'll also see how car designers get clever to comply with laws without sacrificing too much style. So hop in and let's get going. Just do a quick drive through American cars over the decades. You just can't deny that each era set its own car design trends. In fact, many car enthusiasts who are nostalgic for classic cars say that the cars from the 50s, 60s, or 70s had diversity and distinctive beauty. But modern cars today lack personality, originality, and diversity. They're homogeneous, mainstream, and boring in comparison. And when you stop to think about it, well, it's somewhat true. I mean, yes, new cars can be sleek, bold, and shiny. But nevertheless, across the board, cars are more similar and homogeneous than ever before. So what's killing the design of American cars? The reality is that there are a lot of other impacting factors that heavily dictate how new cars look. Take, for example, government regulations. For example, ever notice how modern cars have higher front ends compared to older cars? This is because the U.S. Federal Motor Vehicle Safety set certain pedestrian impact standards. The result is a higher hood and a higher back. After all, the rest of the car needs to follow. And that's why modern cars have a higher belt line than before. Many car makers don't want to raise the roof line because that would make the car look awkward and odd. So the roof line usually stays the same. But this is the reason why many modern cars have shorter rear windows, or what some people call bunker windows. Let's talk about U.S. federal rollover crash standards. This led to car makers adding thicker pillars to cars. Thicker pillars allow car makers to add additional airbags, which is a positive side benefit since it protects us. The collateral damage is that it kills cars' aesthetics. In fact, this is the reason why passengers in the back row have ever smaller side windows. And the valance window or vent glass, that's the triangle side windows in the back, are so small these days, they're hardly functional. There are other regulations that impact even the creases in sheet metal and sheet metal edges. For example, European Union laws state that a minimum of 0.2 inch radius for all edges on the front and rear fascias. A sharper 0.1 inch radius is allowed for other exposed body panels. Basically, anything that can hit a potential pedestrian body or head has to be soft. Even grills and badges can't be sharp, but must have blunted edges. So designers have to get smart and skillfully give the illusion of any sharp edges. Also, their manufacturing facilities need to get precise if they don't want to be accused of not being in compliance. This is similar reasoning why many modern American cars have fatter, flatter bumpers. Did you know that the U.S. dictates that headlights must have at least 7.8 square inches of illuminated surface area for each brake light? This is for safety reasons, of course. Of that, 1.9 square inches must be visible 45 degrees off the car's center and 15 degrees below the taillight's horizontal center line. That's why the McLaren P1's Fury taillights are super thin and arch the way they do. They comply with the law, but at bare minimum to optimize style. Just imagine being the inspector who has to check each new car down to each inch, degree, and letter of the law. Also, let's take a look at the Ford Raptor. You can't deny it's a beastly machine, especially with those front semi-truck running lights on its grille. But it's not just for aesthetics or design brilliance that Ford applied them. Actually, it's because the U.S. mandates that any vehicle that's more than 80 inches wide has to have 5 amber auxiliary lights. It's a requirement that these lights be installed on the grille or on the roof. Ever wonder why the Jaguar F-Type has those black plastic fins on the rear body? Everyone knows that sports cars inherently love to reveal a bit of tire tread. It's naturally part of the design language, and it's the reason why stylists give sports cars' bodies rear wheel cutouts. But EU laws mandate that fenders must cover the entire tread width to a specific degree. So Jaguar got clever. They added the fins just enough to satisfy the EU law while showing off some tread. In the 1950s, there were less car models available to customers compared to what we see now. But not just that, any consumer could differentiate each car like a Mustang versus a Cadillac very easily. That's because there were less government regulations. On the flip side, it also meant that each model differed from another in terms of safety. For example, the 1953 Mercury Monterey had a rigid steering column and sharp levers on the heating system. The problem is it could potentially impact the driver on impact. So while we can appreciate there are safety standards put in place, we can also understand how laws impact even the mechanical design and layout of cars. Over the decades, the U.S. has added laws that require a car maker to add seat belts, airbags, crumple zones. For every safety feature that gets mandated, it puts a restraint or fence around what car stylists can conceive. There are lots of other constraints constraints too, but consider this added layer of complexity. The rules in the US aren't always the same as the rules in Europe or Asia, so you can imagine how car stylists and engineers need to create multiple versions for different markets. Or worse, if they want to cut costs and create a design that simultaneously complies with multiple markets, well then, they're forced to work with the least common denominator. So you can see how that stifles creativity. If a car isn't designed from the beginning with all markets in mind, then even changing a plastic piece can become a quickly expensive job. Car designers aren't just limited by government regulations. Like it or not, they're also limited by physics. Take, for example, aerodynamics. Aerodynamics has a huge impact on car performance, fuel efficiency, and wind noise. But aerodynamic requirements can also kill a car design. A case in point is the Chevy Volt. When the concept version first came out, it had more visual flair. But the reality is that this vehicle had been made as a concept vehicle. The real vehicle would have offered less air resistance than any other sedan in all of Chevy's history. So that's why Chevy Volt we see today is significantly different than the original concept. For the sake of car performance and fuel efficiency, Chevy changed the Volt from rear-wheel drive to front-wheel drive. This meant that car proportions needed to change too. Most of the design adjustments happened on the back end of the EV. The concept had a round back with a short overhang, which isn't aerodynamic. So Chevy added sharper edges to control air separation points and minimize drag, and that's what we see today. Take a look at the Chrysler 300. This is Chrysler's iconic full-size luxury sedan. It's for the sole purpose of optimizing fuel efficiency that the rear was made aerodynamically higher than the front. This wedge shape creates less drag, so the car uses less fuel. It's scientifically smart for sure, but you can't say the same for aesthetics. Sometimes you have to sacrifice design in the name of aerodynamic. In fact, it's not uncommon in the car industry for designers and aerodynamics to be at odds with one another. Consider too, as the science gets more precise, this means the requirements are more difficult than before, and the limit to creativity can become hair-splitting tighter. It used to be they had a window to work in, inches in fact, but now it's millimeters. Problem is, if you prioritize physics and aerodynamics, then you end up with cars that start looking all the same. Many performance cars fans love and expect certain cars to be loud. To them, the roar of a V8 is music to their ears. But the US has regulations that cap the sound levels or amount of noise coming from a car. Each state has different requirements, but even stricter are European requirements. But they all share a common goal, which is to minimize the public's noise-related stress, potential for high blood pressure, and other health ailments due to loud cars. This led sports car makers to modify or redesign specific exhaust systems. Doing that isn't cheap by any means, but it's not just that. Nowadays, mechanical technology means cars are more efficient than ever. So it's cheaper for car makers to install artificial car noises that mimic engine noise. If you haven't seen my video on mufflers, check it out. A largely unspoken impact is also gender. Just look back in the 1960s when America produced stunning muscle cars and other distinct classics. But not long after that time, more women started gradually entering the workforce. Then in the late 1970s, more women started attending college and get more professional jobs. And this meant more women needed to drive. Also, more women were now able to buy cars. Today, we have more working women in U.S. history than ever before. Would it surprise you to hear that according to one statistic, women today buy or influence the purchase of 85% of all cars? Also, more women hold driver's license than men. Compare that to the 1960s when men held 60% of driver's license in the U.S. Women also spend less time on the road. So this is the reality of the gender demographic. And car makers have been following the changing trend. For example, statistically speaking, women tend to choose smaller, more fuel-efficient cars. Needless to say, car makers take that into consideration when they style cars that appeal to the crowd. So we must say, no doubt, this too has some impact on car design and style. We no longer see muscle cars due to the oil crisis of the 1970s and the subsequent entrance of more efficient foreign cars. Nevertheless, even fuel-efficient cars today don't carry that boxy tank look, that angular, bold, and stereotypically manly form we saw in the 1950s and 60s. Nowadays, cars have more wider, gender-neutral appeal. They're more homogeneous and mainstream. Well, in conclusion, diverse, stunning cars with personality are very appealing. I agree. But I think we can all appreciate that cars today are safer than in decades past. Personally, if I had to prioritize between safety, fuel efficiency, performance cars versus aesthetics, well then, I'll choose a homogeneous car rather than an unsafe, unique car. After all, what use is a beautiful car if you get injured or worse, lose your life? But now, you tell me, have you noticed that modern cars are more homogeneous today than before? Do you think older? Do you think other factors are also contributing to this trend? Please comment below and share your opinion. If you like this episode, like and subscribe. Thanks for your support.